The mind of the genius.
Genius is the capacity to see 10 things where the ordinary man sees just one, and where the man of talent sees 2 or 3, plus the ability to register that multiple perception in the material of his art.
Ezra Pound.
There have been many studies conducted over the years by psychologists seeking to understand the nature of genius. This video outlines the features of highly creative thinkers, of people who might otherwise be called a genius. We explore the essential characteristics of genius as identified by various empirical psychological studies, and supplemented by the observations of respected philosophers. The 19th century English philosopher John Stuart Mill had this to say about genius and the adverse influence that public opinion has on those who venture to disagree. The tyranny of public opinion is such as to make eccentricity something to be ashamed of.
Yet to break through that tyranny, people should be eccentric.
Eccentricity has always abounded when and where strength of character has abounded, and the amount of eccentricity in a society has generally been proportional to the amount of genius, mental vigor, and moral courage it contained. That so few dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of the time.
Britain in the 19th century began the Industrial Revolution, a phenomenon that has since spread around the world and accounts for the economic prosperity now enjoyed by a sizable proportion of the planet's population.
That period of British history is notable for its lovable and not so lovable eccentrics whose crazy ideas helped catalyze a remarkable period of innovation.
Even today, the British are known by the rest of the world as being independent thinkers. First characteristic of highly creative people. Productive versus reproductive thinking. We humans are essentially problem-solving creatures. Perhaps this is why one definition of intelligence is the ability to solve problems.
As a species, we have done extraordinarily well at solving the many difficulties and dangers of living in a dangerous and unforgiving world.
But not all problems are created equal.
Some are more difficult than others, and some are diabolically hard, the kind that would defeat all but the most talented problem solver. The typical person, when confronted with a problem, scans their memories for record of a similar problem encountered in the past. How that problem was solved becomes the basis for how the current problem will be solved now.
In other words, solutions are reproduced.
This has the virtue of being tried and proven, plus the advantage of having economy of effort.
There is the added benefit that it does not risk the disapproval of others by being unconventional.
It involves a minimum investment of time and energy to retrieve a tried and proven solution and avoid social embarrassment.
In other words, it is the safe and lazy way. A creative person, on the other hand, thinks productively by reframing the problem, looking at it from different angles. When presented with the same problem, they do not ask how has this been solved in the past?
Instead they ask how many different ways can I think of to solve this problem now?
They enjoy the challenge.
This kind of thinking produces a range of solutions, some of which are unconventional, even highly so. They do not fear the unorthodox, neither do they fear the negative reaction of more conventional minds. Most of all, what this approach requires is the willingness to invest the time and effort into thinking of multiple new ways of solving a problem. Herein lies the heart of creativity, boundless energy generated by an irrepressible enthusiasm, resilience and persistence, plus the willingness to risk the disapproval of more conventionally minded people who are too attached to established ways. Action exercise: cultivate the daily habit of observing your thought processes. Notice the habitual patterns of thought that are produced by various situations so that you become aware of the tendency to fall into reproductive thinking. Once you have noticed this, begin to consciously cultivate productive thinking by establishing the habit of thinking outside of the box, that is, thinking in unorthodox ways. Resist the tendency to slip back into the comfort zone of orthodox, reproductive modes of thinking.
Second characteristic of highly creative people. Perceiving the essence of the situation.
As the Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius famously said in his Meditations, ask yourself, what is this thing in itself, by its own special constitution?
What is it in substance, and in form, and in matter? What is its function in the world? For how long does it subsist? This is excellent advice that can be used every day.
It cultivates a mindset that sees past surface appearances and conventional definitions to perceive the true meaning of a situation.
It cultivates the habit of thinking about things in new ways.
When Leonardo da Vinci wanted to solve a problem, he would look at it from many different angles, searching for the true meaning referred to by Aurelius.
He would tirelessly restructure the problem again and again to get to the essential truth of it.
At the beginning of this process, the first few attempts to understand the essence of the problem would usually be the conventional way of looking at it. The way that has been conditioned by past experience and the received set of orthodox ideas held by that society. But the genius has the courage to persist, knowing they are yet to perceive the actual truth of the situation.
It is the truth that they seek.
They know that the orthodox way of understanding something might once have been true, but change is constant and inevitable, and what was once true may no longer be as true. Even when the majority of people still believe the orthodox view is true does not necessarily make it so.
Consider the history of science. There are countless examples of groundbreaking scientists who overthrew established paradigms of scientific thought.
Freud, Einstein, Darwin. There was initially great resistance to the new paradigms from those who had invested heavily in the established paradigms. Consider the example of the astronomer Galileo. The orthodox view of the cosmos during Galileo's time, as supported by the Church, held that Earth was at the center of everything.
His work proved that it was in fact the Sun that was the center of the solar system.
That was the inescapable conclusion of the observational data that he collected, as unorthodox as it was.
He nearly lost his life for the heresy of his findings. He was put on trial by the Roman Inquisition and was nearly put to death. He was forced to live under house arrest for the rest of his life.
Harsh punishment for a paradigm-breaking scientist by today's standards, but merciful in the 17th century. Action exercise: cultivate the daily habit of looking at the familiar objects and phenomena in your world in a new light.
No longer be content to see their surface appearance and assume you know what it is.
Ask yourself, what is this thing in itself, by its own special constitution? In time you will develop a perspective that is not content to see only surface appearances, but is more interested in knowing what inner conditions created those surface effects.
Third characteristic of highly creative people: insatiable curiosity. Highly creative people are insatiably curious about the world generally. Their curiosity is a compulsion, they cannot not be curious.
They know that a creative mind must be constantly fed with interesting information in the same way that a garden must be fertilized for it to remain productive. The knowledge they gather may seem to be random, yet there is an underlying pattern that becomes apparent over time as this apparently unconnected knowledge across domains coalesces into a more or less integrated worldview. There may be gaps, but these are filled when recognized. The expanded worldview of the highly creative person is a working model for how the world works. The non-creative person is content to know less, so their worldview is incomplete.
There is much about the world that they are baffled by.
Curiosity is all about having an open mind, a mind that allows information in without judgment. The creative person knows that the judgmental mind is a closed mind, one that has decided it knows enough already. Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, best known as the author of the Tao Te Ching, made mention of the disease. In the ancient world, as today, there is that highly educated person who has spent years acquiring knowledge in a narrow discipline.
It causes them to lose perspective.
They come to believe they know everything about everything, and so become arrogant and dismissive of others. The open-minded person also becomes knowledgeable, but they avoid the disease by realizing that in the grander scheme they know almost nothing, so vast is the totality of knowledge.
The best vaccine to prevent the disease is humility.
So the highly creative person cultivates the attitude of the beginner who knows little and is open to new ideas from many sources in a constantly evolving world. Action exercise: cultivate insatiable curiosity in your daily life. Take a renewed interest in the familiar objects and events that occupy your world.
This will achieve two goals: the development of curious mindset, and finding solutions to current problems.
Life has an uncanny knack of giving you what you need for personal growth.
If something is present in your life, it is no accident. It is there because you need it for personal growth. You may be going through great difficulties and perhaps doubt your ability to deal with them. You may even feel that it is unfair that these things should be happening at all. Try to avoid self-pity. It solves nothing.
By studying the events and people in your life with renewed interest, you will come to see them in a new light, understand them at a deeper level. Avoid the temptation to judge and for the time being simply accept things are the way they are.
Accepting them is not an invitation to make them permanent.
You are working towards transforming them into something better, and the first step is to accept the reality of what is.
Fourth characteristic: externalizing your thinking.
One of the reasons that ancient Greece became the foundation of Western civilization was its dialectic method, the practice of putting its ideas out into the world where others might see it, hear it, think about it, argue over it, and ultimately come up with new and interesting combinations of the original elements. Socrates is perhaps the best-known exponent of the dialectic methods. Indeed, it is usually referred to as the Socratic method or Socratic dialogue.
The method approaches and arrives at the truth by subjecting opposing ideas to rigorous logical inquiry. The weaker of the two propositions is burned away by the heat of inquiry, leaving the truth exposed. It is not a pleasant process, and it is not for the faint-hearted or thin-skinned.
Geniuses internalize this process.
The dialogue happens within.
The Italian Renaissance is characterized by highly creative people in the arts and sciences who externalized their ideas.
The Renaissance had a particular emphasis on the visual representation of ideas, which was genius in itself.
Pictures are easier to understand than words or mathematical formulas. Da Vinci and Galileo were both talented visual artists. Most people are familiar with Da Vinci's art, but not so many know that Galileo had a talent for making maps, diagrams and other visual representations of his ideas that allowed a wider audience to understand what he was talking about.
Had he relied on written treatises, full of mathematical formulae, as his peers still did, it is doubtful that his work would have been as influential. Highly creative people are skilled at thinking visually and often find quite innovative ways to communicate their ideas visually.
A picture is worth 1,000 words and is an excellent way to communicate a complex message quickly to people with a limited attention span. The software tools now available offer unprecedented possibilities for highly creative people to represent their ideas in highly effective ways.
Action exercise: cultivate the habit of thinking visually.
Specifically, take a familiar idea and think of how it could be represented visually. Experiment with various ways by sketching or using one of the many software tools available for diagramming, flow charting, 3D rendering, etc.
Fifth characteristic: an avalanche of productivity.
It should be clear from the preceding that geniuses are enthusiastic and have a well-developed capacity for hard work. It is arguably a characteristic more important than having a high IQ. They may have been born with this inclination for hard work, they may have learned it from mentors, or more likely a combination of the two.
One thing is for certain though, it is a learnable skill.
From our evolutionary past we inherited an instinct to conserve energy. After all, in the past, our ancestors were chronically undernourished and it made sense to not expend more energy than was necessary. Times have certainly changed, but the instinct to conserve effort remains firmly established in people.
Geniuses have boundless enthusiasm for the task at hand.
It gives them the energy to produce the multiple different versions of possible solutions that are necessary for the best solution to be arrived at. They keep going long after the average person stops out of exhaustion or a desire for comfort.
They resist the temptation to come up with a standard solution.
So geniuses are extraordinarily prolific with their output. They know that only a small proportion of their work will be considered good or great by the world, even though they do not usually know at the time which of their ideas will be considered great. So they just keep pumping out the ideas, working the averages, knowing that some of what they do will succeed, happy to pay the high price of success that more economy of effort-minded people would find too high.
Most people think that 20 unsuccessful attempts equals 20 failures.
The genius sees them as 20 iterations of a trial, each one telling them some useful information, i.e. what does not work.
Each one bringing them closer to success.
Action exercise: make it a priority to devote a certain amount of time every day to working on your projects.
Discipline yourself to do it whether you feel like it or not. By doing so, you are building creative momentum.
It cannot be bought or borrowed, it can only be earned through hard work.
Once you have this momentum, Guard it carefully because it is priceless. You can apply this momentum to whatever project you choose, and it will carry you through to the end so long as you maintain your self-discipline.
This creative period should ideally be when you are at your best, physically and mentally. For some, this is in the morning, for others the afternoon, evening or early hours of the morning.
You will know when you are at your best. 7th characteristic. Juxtaposing the dissimilar. The human ego is a classifier of phenomena. It systematically categorizes and labels what it encounters in the world.
For the most part, it is an efficient way of dealing with the world at the functional level, one which has served humanity well over the course of our evolution. But as useful as this egoic habit is in solving the mundane problems of day-to-day life, it is not up to the task of making quantum leaps forward. A genius transcends this instinctive and often compulsive thought process by cultivating the habit of placing categorically different ideas and objects together.
Things that clearly do not belong to the same class. They resist the tendency to categorize in the conventional way, suspending their judgment so they can take a long, fresh look at the situation.
This aspect of genius is an extension of the random selection and combination of ideas, discussed earlier. The history of innovation tells of many breakthroughs made by creative minds that made the leap from the ordinary to the extraordinary, seeing similarities between ideas and objects from quite different domains.
The eureka moment can happen any time, any place, under any circumstances.
We may not know when such moments will occur, but we do know that it will not occur without first investing the time-effort of sifting through lots of different possibilities.
Inspiration can happen while awake, or while lucid dreaming.
It only requires the juxtaposition of two or more ideas that have probably never been placed together before in anyone's mind, and for those elements to have some fundamental correspondence with each other. Action exercise. Set yourself the task of becoming consciously aware of how you communicate in your daily life.
It will become apparent that much of what you say is said habitually.
Standard phrases and expressions that are produced in response to a particular situation.
You reply to someone, or react to a situation in the accustomed way. Set yourself the task of breaking out of this habit. Consciously try to think of a new and better way of expressing yourself, of responding to something, even if the stimulus is the same as it ever was.
People will immediately notice the difference and will probably appreciate what you are doing because it sounds fresh and therefore interesting. Being appreciated by others is not the primary purpose of the exercise, it is to get into the habit of thinking in new and original ways.
You will know it is working when you hear yourself say something and realize that probably no one else anywhere, anytime has ever said that unique combination of words. 8 characteristic. Contraries are complementary.
The ancient Greeks with their dialectic method proved beyond doubt that being able to entertain two opposing views at the same time leads to a creative conflict that elevates the debate to a higher level of understanding. It is as if when two ideas collide head-on in a solutions-oriented mindset, their momentum is redirected upwards and the idea is transformed in the process. The Danish physicist Niels Bohr expressed this principle in his maxim, contraria sunt complementa, contraries are complementary. He believed that the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth, not a falsehood as one might expect.
Bohr devoted his life to the uncovering of profound truths. He believed that keeping an open mind, not rushing to judgment, allowing creative conflict to work its course ultimately brings the mind to a higher level. The same principle has been observed by F. Scott Fitzgerald when he said the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time, and still retain the ability to function. The researcher Albert Rothenberg clearly identified this preeminent ability of highly creative people in the personalities and works of such luminaries as Einstein, Mozart, Edison, Pasteur, Joseph Conrad, and Picasso. Action exercise. Dilemmas of one kind or another are a regular feature of everyone's life, an inescapable part of being human. The presence of two or more conflicting factors in your mind is uncomfortable. The normal tendency is to avoid, sidestep, ignore, repress or in some other way try to make it go away or pretend it doesn't exist. The next time this happens, override the normal tendency and face the dilemma fairly and squarely. Look directly at it and accept that it exists, and you are going to find a solution. See it as an opportunity to grow, to sharpen your problem-solving skills. Finding the solution will probably not be easy or fast. It may involve quite some thought during which you will feel uncomfortable. Ignore the complaining voice in the background that says this shouldn't be happening.
Accept that painful experiences like this are part of the way a person grows. Sooner or later, a solution will present itself, and that will feel very good indeed.
Remember that while your brain has the ability to adapt and establish new neural pathways, the process of doing so feels quite uncomfortable, as school children everywhere will no doubt agree. 9th characteristic: metaphorical thinking.
A common characteristic of highly creative people is the ability to see correspondences and linkages that are not obvious to others. Metaphorical thinking is an aspect of this general theme. When you look deeply into the true nature of something, you notice that the patterns you observe are repeated in quite different domains and at different scales of magnitude. For example, in nature, the spiral is clearly a pattern that is repeated at many different scales. A galaxy is a spiral, so is a hurricane, a nautilus shell, a blossoming flower, all the way down to the behavior of some subatomic particles. To compare a galaxy to a blossoming rose is a novel comparison, but one which bears metaphorical truth. Perceiving the essential spiralness of these diverse phenomena tells us something profound about the nature of the physical universe. It points to there being an underlying principle, a law of physics that causes physical matter to form itself into a spiral.
We cannot see the principle, we can only see the behavior of matter under the influence of the principle. The ancient Chinese called this principle the Tao.
The history of innovation has many examples of inventors who looked past surface appearances at the underlying meaning of phenomena and noticed the metaphorical correspondences and find new correspondences. The ability to think metaphorically is to shift one's awareness from physical form into the formless domain of abstractions where the imagination is no longer limited by the constraints of the physical world.
The mind is free to imagine anything it wants.
This domain is where ideas originate, and metaphor is the language of that domain. It might be argued that metaphor is a universal language. Metaphor is therefore a language worth cultivating and understanding of.
If nothing else, it will build a bridge and help to integrate the various layers of our psyche.
Action exercise: as you go about your daily life, take a fresh look at the familiar objects in your world. With your attention firmly in the present moment, with no thought of past or future, really look at something and keep on looking at it until you begin to see past its surface meaning to its deeper, essential meaning.
This will call for considerable patience on your part.
Your patience will be rewarded handsomely.
When you have penetrated to the essence of that object, then think of what other objects or phenomena share that essential characteristic. Try not to censor your thinking. 10th characteristic: open to new directions. Creative people are flexible in the face of change.
Breakthrough ideas are generated by one's problem-solving mind at an unconscious level. Provided it is taken seriously and given due consideration, these apparently random thoughts can be the key to solving the problem. This creative mindset has transcended the desire for stability and predictability. While the majority of people still instinctively seek the predictability of the comfortable status quo, the highly creative person accepts the fundamental reality of continuous change as a fact of life.
They do not resist it, rather they embrace it.
They accept accidental change, recognize it as an opportunity for growth and accept the discomfort that it generates, knowing that it is an inevitable part of the creative process. Action exercise: cultivate an awareness of how disruptive change can present opportunities for growth. Accept change as a feature of operating in a fluidly changing reality.
11th characteristic: solitude and silence. Geniuses almost universally seem to have a preference for solitude when they are working.
When there are no distractions, the creative mind can journey into its depths and make contact with something that whispers stories from that which lies beyond the physical world of form. The German philosopher Goethe put it this way: one can be instructed in society, one is inspired only in solitude. To hear that small voice of your creative imagination, there needs to be outward silence.
Geniuses are not being antisocial in preferring solitude.
They simply understand that silence is a necessary condition for creative work. As Robert Louis Stevenson observed, there is a fellowship more quiet even than solitude, and which, rightly understood, is solitude made perfect.
Religious mystics, for example, take solitude and silence to an extreme. A hermit monk will spend their waking hours in solitude and silence.
Indeed, they may spend years this way, seeking to become conscious of the divine essence within themselves. The 11th century mystic poet and Sufi master Jalal ad-Din Rumi described it thus: "Silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation." Rumi was a follower of Islam, but this simple idea is found across many spiritual traditions, religions and philosophies. Action exercise: when faced with a problem, practice sitting in silent solitude for a period of time not less than 30 minutes, and contemplate the nature of the problem.
This could be indoors or out. Nature can have a beneficial effect on this process. 12th characteristic.
Operate outside comfort zone.
There is an unquestioned assumption held dear by many that if something is painful, then it should be avoided. Why would any sane person do otherwise?
Over time though, this mindset builds a prison cell around the person who thinks this way. Snug in their comfortable cocoon, whatever lies beyond is scary and must be avoided. But always being in one's comfort zone offers few opportunities for personal growth or creative output. Being overly attached to comfort may also be an indication of being afraid of failure.
Creative people do not shy away from difficult problems. They endure the discomfort of being in this problem space because they know it will reward them ultimately. No pain, no gain is the inescapable truth.
This preparedness to endure pain or discomfort should not be mistaken for masochism.
Creative people do not seek out pain for its own sake. They know that life is an ongoing cycle of easy and hard, easy and hard. You cannot have one without the other.
Action exercise: the next time a difficult problem presents itself, resist the temptation to pretend it does not exist or pass it along to someone else. Stop, take a few deep breaths, relax and decide that you will use this problem as an opportunity to grow by reinforcing the habit of operating outside of your comfort zone.
Any problem has a limited duration and will pass eventually. The more actively you engage with it, the faster it will pass. 13th characteristic. An attitude of gratitude.
Complacency, a sense of entitlement or simply taking the circumstances of one's life for granted has a highly corrosive effect on creativity. It is a negative mindset that lulls the imagination and creates a sense of dissatisfaction that does nothing for one's enjoyment of life, much less creativity. Gratitude, on the other hand, is a mysterious and often overlooked force of nature that has a powerfully transformative effect on those who practice it.
Most people think gratitude is just being polite when someone does something for you. But it is far more than just that.
An attitude of gratitude, once established in your mindset, opens your mind in wonderment at the richness of the world around you that went unrecognized when you were taking it for granted. In a way, gratitude opens the way for more good things to enter your life by demonstrating that you appreciate what you already have.
This principle applies in the realm of ideas as much as on the physical plane. Nature is generous to grateful people.
Someone who complains about their life, what they have or do not have, is closing the door to greater abundance by effectively saying, "I don't like what I already have, bring me something better." Life does not reward this attitude with greater blessings.
Ungrateful people are left with what they already have until they learn to appreciate it.
If what they have remains unappreciated for too long, it too will go, hence the old saying, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." It is normal for people to take each new day for granted, but imagine for a minute that this day is your last on earth, or you have recently survived a life-threatening event. How very precious life seems then. This is the carpe diem, or seize the day, principle. Live each day as if it were your last while gratefully working towards a long and happy future. Action exercise: cultivate an attitude of gratitude by looking objectively at your life, taking stock of the many blessings that have been bestowed upon you that you may be taking for granted. Even if you are a person of very modest means, your health is a blessing that one cannot put a price upon, as the billionaire lying on their deathbed would probably agree.
Begin each new day with an expression of profound thanks for the gift of this day.
Sit for a few moments on the side of the bed and generate a strong sense of gratitude for the gift of another day of life. Believe me, if you have ever had a near-death experience, either through sickness or accident, each new day can seem like a miracle to be very grateful for. Cultivate the habit of thanking people frequently, even for those small acts of kindness that most people overlook or take for granted.
Thank them even when it is their job to do what they have just done for you. Let them hear the warmth and sincerity in your voice. Watch how their attitude towards you is transformed. 14th characteristic. Being non-attached to ideas.
The creative person intuitively understands that creativity is a process that requires non-attachment if the ideas are to continue to flow. There is a tendency in human nature to become attached to people, beliefs, environments, substances, lifestyles, the familiar things in our lives.
We instinctively know that by gathering and maintaining these, we can ensure our continued existence. You could call it an expression of the survival instinct.
The tendency to accumulate possessions and become attached to them is so fundamental that it is recognized as the first of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. We suffer because we become attached to people, ideas, and things that will surely pass into non-existence one day. This suffering is evident in 100 different ways, yet it is perhaps seen most clearly in the fear of death. The egoic self knows for certain that one day it will be extinguished, and the thought of losing its identity, its life story, its friends and possessions is terrifying. The survival instinct is our most powerful instinct, but its role in the creative process is an altogether unhelpful one because it causes us to become attached to ideas and fearful of being separated from them. The highly creative person knows that there is a vast river of knowledge and ideas flowing all around them, and that the process of invention is about tuning one's mind to become aware of these ideas as they glide past. Nikola Tesla, the discoverer of alternating electrical current, described it thus: "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration.
I have not penetrated into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists."
The supply of ideas is inexhaustible, so it is unnecessary and counterproductive to become attached to any particular idea. Action exercise: cultivate awareness in your daily life of your tendency to think, speak and act in habitual ways.
For most people, this will account for perhaps 90% of their time, so pervasive is this tendency.
Understand that this tendency creates a strong sense of comfort and that relinquishing attachment is going to cause suffering, but that this is the necessary price for being highly creative.
Acknowledge to yourself that this is a pervasive practice.
Once aware, you are in a position to choose whether to remain attached to a particular habit or idea or belief, or whether it is time to let it go and rethink it. An habitual response or established belief might have been appropriate for the time and place in which it was formed, but the world changes over time, and what was once true may no longer as true. Non-attachment to ideas simply keeps the channels open so that the flow of ideas can continue. Once you latch hold of certain ideas and start to build an identity around them, the flow begins to dwindle.
15th and final characteristic. Resilience.
It will be clear by now that the creative person is someone who is not afraid to try and fail, to endure people's scorn, and place themselves under pressure as they relentlessly plow through alternatives on the way to eventual success.
There is much stress in all of this, so psychological resilience is an important attribute of genius, without which a person would soon implode.
The biographies of geniuses throughout history tell the story of the various difficulties they faced and the resilience they tapped in the depths of their character that gave them the strength to persevere. The lives of geniuses never seem to run smoothly. The Austrian composer Mozart is a prime example. While he enjoyed considerable public acclaim, he also experienced much stress and sadness in his short life.
It would appear that success and stress are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other.
It is true that Mozart died at the age of 35, yet in his relatively short life he produced a prodigious amount of work. Of Mozart it could truly be said that the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long, as Lao Tzu observed.
Of course, Mozart is an extreme case.
His talent was so extraordinary that he emerges as a leader even when placed in the company of the other acclaimed composers in history.
For the listener who is wondering how resilience applies in their own life and work, it will be worth understanding something of the process by which resilience is cultivated.
The psychologist Albert Siebert researched resilience and is considered a preeminent authority on the subject. Siebert suggests that resilience is constituted by 5 attributes: a. Emotional stability and a sense of inner well-being; b. Well-developed problem-solving skills in the outer world; c. A self-actualizing mindset with high self-esteem and self-confidence; d. Resiliency skills based around acceptance of changing circumstances; and e. Accept adverse events as being ultimately helpful. At the risk of oversimplifying the issue, resilience would seem to be about being not attached to specific outcomes and secure enough in yourself to be able to go with the flow and adapt constructively to the changing circumstances of life, recognizing that adverse events actually offer the greatest potential for growth.
Events in and of themselves are neutral.
It is how we choose to think about them that makes them good or bad. As Shakespeare's Hamlet rightly observed, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Action exercise: try to perceive the essence of resilience as simply not minding what happens.
Cultivate a mindset in which you find something good and valuable in an apparently adverse turn of events. Life may not always give you what you want, but always gives you what you need for personal growth. Our limited human perspective often obscures the bigger picture.